My parents came from Palestine, actually, then. They met here in Palestine, Israel. My father from Lithuania, my mother from Warsaw. She came with her father, who was a tremendous Zionist. And since she was the youngest of the family, she was left with him. And my father came here, he was a rabbi, and he came with his wife, which was not my mother, and his son, who was then about 2 or 3. She died here in labour, childbirth. So he's left with this boy of 3, 4, and whatever. Times were very tough here. Wasn't a job, so he actually was invited here by the late Rav Cook, and I've got sort of post letters from him, and in fact he married my parents. And he got a position in England, in Old Montague Street. There was a synagogue called the Chevra Shas, which was quite a well-known one in its time. And he came to England with my mother and my brother. I was then born in England. They got married and they came straight away. I was then born in England a few years later, and they lived their life in the East End, which was very Jewish. My father never spoke English. I asked my brother this. He's now 87 and his memory's going, but he said no. I said, well, how was his English? It didn't exist. But it didn't matter then. Everybody spoke Yiddish, so they spoke Yiddish. My mother also, I don't know how she coped a bit better, I think. She only learned English when I went to school, and my brother refused to speak English at home. He only spoke Yiddish as well, and he's actually got his Yiddish is very good and his English is very good. But he went to Davenant Street Foundation Grammar School, came as a boy of 8 not speaking a word, and then got into grammar school and did very well. He left and studied pharmacy, and he bought shops, and they got married. He bought premises in Palmer's Green and Bowes Park, and he succeeded in what he did. I went to school in St. Foundation Girls' School, Spital Square, that was something my mother was keen for me to get into, because I was growing up, when I was small, it was the war, and I didn't have much of education. I was jumped around from one to the other, because mothers and children were sent out to the country. And I went to a few different schools, and in fact, when I went for an interview to St. Foundation Grammar School, because there was a pre-admission at the age of 9, and then you took your scholarship at the age of 11, but once you were in the school system, it was easier to get past your scholarship. And she asked my mother, was I born in this country, because I had such a foreign accent, in England. So that was it, and I grew up there, not very, looking back on it, I think quite hard, considering my children's lifestyle when they were growing up. Played in playgrounds. We lived near a sugar refinery called Martinez, which just belched smoke day and night. And I didn't realize it then, but it was actually a very poor existence, because my father died in 1941. That's like 11 years after he came to England, and my mother had to fend for herself. She had no family in England. Her sisters and brother were in Russia, and looking back on it, I feel she had a very tough time. The expectations were different then, so it was always food on the table. She let out rooms, and we had boarders, and that's how she managed. That's it really at that point. Is there anything else you particularly want to know? My mother had, with her father, my grandfather, had bought a plot. He wouldn't come with my mother to England. He stayed in Israel. He managed to buy a plot of land in Bat Yam with money that my mother sent over to him. And in the 50s, my mother realized that we had to get out the East End, because it was getting less and less Jews, and not very pleasant. So she managed to sell the plot of land in Israel, and with that we moved to Edgware and lived there in a house and actually those were the happiest years before I got married and as a single person. Life was in the East End was very colourful. I used to shop in Petticoat Lane. My mother used to do the shopping, greengroceries there. The grocery shop was manned by two single Jewish women, and it was like a little, how can I describe it? It was, everybody knew everybody in that area. But life was hard. It was very hard.